The grocery store's fluorescent lights hummed above the aisles, a sound both harsh and hollow. It was late evening, the kind of hour when the world seemed tired, when footsteps echoed louder than they should, and the smell of stale coffee at the front counter hung like a reminder that the day had overstayed itself. He stood in line with nothing in his basket, only a restless mind that had carried him there without reason. The CEO, known to others as powerful, decisive, unreachable, looked, in that moment, like a man searching for something he had lost long ago. She was ahead of him, her posture weary, her winter coat too thin for the cold pressing against the windows. In her arms, a baby stirred, small fingers curling in sleep. She placed a single can of formula on the counter with a care that betrayed how much it meant. The cashier scanned it, the numbers appearing on the glowing screen, and then came the silence, broken only by the dull beep of a declined card. Her face flushed, though she lifted her chin as if pride could hold back the tide of shame. She whispered that she would return it, her voice nearly swallowed by the hum of the lights. He saw it all, the trembling in her hands as she clutched the can, the way she pressed her lips together as though sealing off the cry that wanted to escape. He knew about silence, about dignity held together by a thread. Without a word, he stepped forward, sliding his card across. The movement was small, almost clumsy, as though he feared drawing attention. The cashier glanced between them, uncertain, but the transaction went through. She turned toward him, eyes narrowed with suspicion, gratitude buried beneath layers of wariness. "You didn't have to," she said, her voice low. He only nodded, the receipt crumpled in his fist. She left quickly, the baby's soft cry fading as the door swung shut behind her. Back in his apartment high above the city, he set the receipt on the table. It lay there like an accusation, flimsy paper but heavier than steel. His world was glass and steel, rooms too wide for one man's footsteps, evenings that ended with nothing but silence echoing through the walls. He tried to shake her image from his mind, but it clung, the way she shielded her child as if the whole world meant to take him away. He thought of the fortune in his accounts, the boardrooms where his voice commanded attention, and how useless all of it seemed against a moment like that. She returned to her apartment with the formula pressed to her chest. The baby stirred, hungry, and she whispered apologies into the night. The apartment was narrow, its paint peeling, its heat unreliable, but it was hers. She fed her child slowly, humming a lullaby her own mother had once sung. The can of formula stood on the counter like a reprieve. She hated needing help, hated that a stranger had seen her weakness, but she hated more the thought of her child's hunger. Pride, she told herself, could be swallowed. Hunger could not. Days passed. He went about his work, meetings stacked, voices demanding, screens glowing late into the night. Yet the memory stayed. One evening, restless, he left his office and walked without direction, his polished shoes carrying him into parts of the city he rarely saw. He passed a laundromat with fogged windows, machines turning with slow rhythm, and through the glass, he saw her again. She sat on a hard plastic chair, baby on her lap, folding clothes with hands too tired to be so careful. Something in him eased at the sight, an odd relief that she was real, not just a face his loneliness had invented. He stepped inside, the warm air carrying the scent of detergent. She looked up, her expression wary-guarded. "You again," she murmured, half a question, half a warning. He gave a small smile, not the polished one he used in boardrooms, but a clumsy, human thing. "Just passing by," he said. She didn't answer. The baby fussed, and she struggled with the stroller wheel that had jammed. He crouched, his expensive suit brushing against the floor, and fixed it with steady hands. No flourish, no comment, just the quiet act of someone unwilling to watch her struggle alone. Trust did not come quickly. She had known men whose kindness asked for payment later. So she watched him closely, searching for cracks, for the demand that would eventually surface. Yet none came. Instead, there were small things. A cup of coffee left on the folding table for her. A toy that appeared one afternoon with no explanation. The way he held the baby once so she could fold a pile of clothes without interruption. The child reached for him, and though his hands looked awkward and used to such a fragile weight, They were steady. It was only later that she learned who he was. Someone mentioned his name, a whisper heavy with recognition, and she realized the man in her laundromat was not just kind, but powerful, wealthy beyond imagination. She recoiled, unsure what to make of it. "Why?" she asked him one evening, her voice thin as the baby slept in her arms. "Why notice me?" He looked at her for a long time before answering, his gaze unflinching. "Because I know what it is to be unseen." He told her little by little how his family had fractured after his father's death, how success had filled his days, but not his nights, how the silence in his penthouse echoed louder than any applause he had earned. She listened, not out of politeness, but because the honesty in his voice stripped away the walls she had built. She told him, in turn, about the father who had left before her baby was born, about nights she had worked 2 jobs and still come home short, about how every lullaby she sang was half a prayer. When winter deepened, her child fell ill, a fever that frightened her, a cough that wouldn't stop. She tried to manage alone, wrapping blankets tighter, pressing cool cloths against a burning forehead. She didn't call him. Pride still held her tongue. But he noticed when she didn't appear at the laundromat, when her small routines broke. He went to her door, knocking gently until she opened, exhaustion written across her face. He said nothing, only lifted the child into his arms and drove them to the hospital. He stayed the night in the sterile waiting room, his suit rumpled, coffee cooling beside him, his eyes never leaving the door of the pediatric ward. When the baby's fever broke, relief washed through her like light after storm. She found him still there, head bowed in sleep, hand clenched around the receipt he had carried since that first night. Something shifted inside her then, a trust that had nothing to do with wealth, nothing to do with power. He had chosen to stay, to wait, to carry her burden as though it were his own. Their lives wove together slowly after that, not with grand gestures, but with dinners in her small kitchen, pasta boiling on a stove that hissed with age, the baby laughing between them. He learned to relax, to laugh without calculating, to hold the child without fear. She learned to accept help without suspicion, to believe that kindness could exist without cost. One night, snow fell thick outside her window. The baby slept in a crib by the wall, his breath soft and even. She sat beside him, her hand resting on the blanket, her eyes reflecting the quiet glow of the lamp. He sat near, holding a book he had not been reading, only watching her with a gentleness that surprised even him. Their hands brushed as they tucked the blanket around the child, a touch so slight, yet so heavy. Silence filled the room, but it was not empty. It was alive, pulsing with something that had been waiting to be spoken. When he leaned toward her, it was not urgency, but inevitability. Their kiss was quiet, almost tentative, but beneath it was the weight of nights spent learning one another's silences. She did not pull away. Her hand rose, touched his cheek, and in that small gesture lay all the trust she had fought to give. Weeks later, the ritual had changed. He no longer returned to an empty apartment. Instead, he sat in her small living room, the baby asleep, her head resting against his shoulder. A fire cracked in the old stove, and he read aloud a letter from his father, one he had carried but never shared. The words spoke of family, of love that endured beyond absence. His voice caught, but her hand in his steadied him. He folded the letter and set it aside, the silence after richer than the words themselves. The city outside moved on, neon and noise and endless motion, but in that room, time slowed. A lonely man who had once known only echoes, a mother who had once carried the world alone, and a child who had needed more than formula now sat together. A family built not by chance, but by quiet choice. Sometimes it is not thunder that alters a life, but the smallest sound, the swipe of a card, the whisper of a lullaby, the breath of a baby asleep between 2 people who had thought themselves alone. And from such moments, everything can change. If this story touched you, share it. Let it travel farther. Somewhere, someone is waiting for a kindness as small as a hand extended in silence, and perhaps yours will be the one that changes everything.